Greetings, enlightened ones. Thank you for joining your generic store brand Reverend. In today's video, we're going to be going over my top 10 favorite industrial bands. Been a hot minute since I did a video like this in terms of the alternative scene within the music aspect of it. And industrial has always been kind of one of those entry-level genres that basically got me into the alternative scene. There were some artists that I wanted to include in here, but I felt were more like agro-tech rather than industrial, even though they're almost one and the same. But the way that the music's produced is a little bit different, which is why I think I'm going to do a separate video on like my top 10 favorite agro-tech artists. Agrotech is one of those things, it's almost like EBM, but it's not EBM. And as you guys know, I'm a very big anti-EBM kind of guy. It's just not for me. I know there's probably some of you that enjoy EBM, but it's just never been one of my things. So without further ado, let's get into my top 10 favorite industrial artists. So number one on my list is probably going to be no surprise to a lot of people, and especially in the alternative scene, which is going to be Skinny Puppy. Skinny Puppy was one of those artists that actually I grew up with when I was at the age of like 5, 6, 4. It wasn't until I got into my teens that I really started heavily listening to them, at least in my high school days. I mean, you can consider Ogre, not the artist Ogre, because that's kind of like Ogre's side project that kind of deviates from Skinny Puppy, but Ogre, the artist himself, you can kind of consider him as like one of those founders of industrial, at least the grunge aspect of industrial. Kind of, you know, pretty much right up there with Nitz or Ebb. I've never seen Skinny Puppy live, which is a very big disappointment on my part. The thing is, I'm just not one for concerts in general. Like, I really don't care for concerts. The only time that I would actually care to really go to a concert nowadays is to see Moreau, which is a darkwave artist. But for the most part, I think it's one of those things where you have a legend industrial influencer that you probably should, I guess in a way, pay your respects and see them live as a kind of bucket list thing to say that, yeah, I saw that guy live, but now Ogre has retired and now he no longer does Skinny Puppy live anymore. But it's like everybody talks about, when the money runs dry, you know, they always somehow kind of come back later down the line, you know, several years later. So we'll see if that ever fruitions. And my favorite album from Skinny Puppy, and no, it's not Remission, even though Remission is a great album, is actually the 12-inch anthology. I find the 12-inch anthology has some really good songs in there that are kind of mixed in a way that extend the song, and the beats are really good. The way that the music flows is super good from the 12 inches. And my favorite song specifically is probably going to be Testure's 12-inch. And then my second favorite industrial band is probably going to be more of an indie band that has surfaced over the last several years, which is Razorback Hollow. This guy, I think he's a one-man band, but he produces really good, classic, gritty industrial grunge that is the same as Skinny Puppy. It's very on par with the same level that Ogre produced. Has that same political message behind it. It's very, very influential of the old classic Ogre, which is pretty much why they're side by side with each other, with being Skinny Puppy being my top one and Razorback Hollow being my second. And my favorite album from him is actually his first album, which is Solus in Tenebris. Favorite song is Philanthropede. Number 3 on my list is going to be Aesthetic Perfection. This is actually another industrial band that I grew up with in my high school years. He is one of the couple that I had basically discovered on my own. Daniel Graves, he's kind of changed his music over the years where it's more like industrial pop. I don't really care for it. I've talked to him a couple times on Facebook and always have kind of told him he needs to make more albums like A Violent Emotion, which is one of his kind of couple first albums that he had made. I think it's his second album that he made. He's like Al Jorgensen from Ministry. He just does not want to recognize that album as a really good, I guess, album that developed him as a person. He looks back on it and he does not like it. He thinks like it's shit, it's dog shit. It was one of his most crappiest works that he's ever made. Funny enough, though, he remastered that whole album last year, so take that for what you will. I've always told him in Facebook posts that, hey, like, dude, you need to make more of this. It's very good. I like it. And there's some of the industrial pop aspect. It's not bad, but it's just not for me. But yes, one of my favorite albums from Aesthetic Perfection is actually going to be, well, I already mentioned it, A Violent Emotion. The song that I like the most from this album is going to be The Ones. And then we got number 4 on my list, which is actually another one of those artists that I grew up in my high school teen years, which is Morticians. These guys are very obscure and underground too. They're pretty old though. They actually were more on the MySpace music days, kind of like if you guys have seen my favorite goth rock, top 10 favorite goth rock artists. I had mentioned Virus, which they were also off of MySpace music back in the days as well. So these guys have been around for quite a while. I don't think a whole lot of people know about them though, because they are so underground. But yes, there's not really a whole lot of information about them other than I could just tell you that they produce really good industrial, grungy industrial. And my favorite album from them is actually Mutilation Recreation, which is I think one of their very first albums. My favorite song from them is Me Psychopath. Number 5 on my list is going to be Imperative Reaction. And again, this is going to be another artist that I grew up with listening to in my high school days. They're kind of known, kind of obscure. I don't think a whole lot of people know about Imperative Reaction as well, but they've been around since I think the late 90s to early 2000s. The only thing that's interesting though is when it comes to my favorite album, my favorite song more or less from them, it's Eulogy for the Sick Child. But the song, it's really hard to choose on this one because I really like Forced from the album and I really like Syntax. If I had to choose, I think I'm going to go with Syntax on this one. I think Syntax is a really good song, but there's so many good songs from this album that it's really hard to pick. But between Forced and Syntax, I'm going to say Syntax is my favorite song from this album. Number 6 on my list is going to be Grendel. Now, it's really hard to say whether or not these guys, again, as mentioned, agrotech and industrial are very similar, but they're also not. If you have a fine ear for how the music's produced, they're really not the same, but they can be classified as industrial. Grendel has very agrotech type of ways of producing the music, so it's hard to say, but there is also some elements of really old school classic industrial in there as well, so that's why I'm just kind of throwing them in here, because it was also an artist that I had heavily grown up with in, you guessed it, my high school days. Grendel's been around for quite a long time. They're also pretty recognizable in the industrial scene. If you guys have ever heard, which is also one of my favorite songs, Zombie Nation, which again I'll have links in the description below of these albums, but Zombie Nation's a very classical song that's actually been remixed 1,000 times in other movies and stuff like that, and I'm sure Grendel's got quite a big payout for how many times this song has been used and things, but very great song. That album, which is again one of my favorite albums, is going to be from Soil Bleed, and you guessed it, favorite song is going to be Zombie Nation. Number 7 on my list is going to be My Life with the Thrill Kill Kult. They're kind of up there with the same level as Revolting Cocks, if you guys have ever heard of them, which they're going to be actually my number 8, so I got you guys a future spoiler alert on that one. But they have that same kind of level of industrial that's kind of on the same par with Revolting Cocks. This is another artist that I don't really know a whole lot about, but I do very much enjoy the way that the music is produced in terms of industrial. So I'm just going to leave this one very short. I've kind of grown up with these guys as well from way back in the way, I wouldn't say high school days, actually way earlier than that when I was kind of a child. My favorite album from these guys is going to be Confessions of a Knife, and my favorite song from them is A Day of Swine and Roses. Alright, if you guys like that future spoiler, number 8 was going to be Revolting Cocks. I discovered these guys kind of when I was starting to get into the goth club scene. I, again, don't really know a whole lot other than they're pretty much old school industrial as well. I think I was kind of venturing. I guess you guys may have heard of Last FM. This was before days of Spotify. That's where I would get a lot of my music artists and expand and venture off trying to find new industrial artists. Because like I said, industrial was one of those genres where I really started heavily getting into. When I was, just barely coming out of high school, getting into the workforce and getting into the club scene. So, Revolting Cocks definitely has a very classical, grungy. They definitely are very grunge industrial. My favorite album from these guys is actually going to be Beers, Steers, and Queers, and my favorite song from them is Something Wonderful. Number 9 on my list is going to be High Functioning Flesh. These guys have also kind of reared their head over the last couple of years. If you guys like Nitzer Ebb or Front 242, the way that these guys produce their music is very, very similar on that level when it comes to those two old school industrial artists. Again, being that they are indie and obscure, there's not really a whole lot I can say about them other than that if you guys, again, like that style of industrial. I think you guys would probably enjoy these guys for being that they are indie and they're a little bit more underground. But I discovered them when I was just kind of barely getting into the club scene as well. My favorite album from these guys is going to be Culture Cut, and the song that I like the most from them is going to be Hands at Play. Alright, number 10 on my list is actually kind of an oddball one, and I say that because it's more classified as industrial metal, which I guess in a way you could probably lump that as its own form of industrial, so I'm not really entirely sure why I'm including it here, but I really do like the way that this industrial is produced. Number 10 on my list is going to be Hanzel Und Gretyl. Now, I'm not entirely sure why I'm kind of including these guys here, just because I kind of consider them more like industrial metal, but you know, a lot of people can say that about Ministry too, and a lot of people look at Ministry as industrial, but I consider them more like industrial metal as well. But you know what, nonetheless, the reason why I'm putting them here is because I really, really like the way that they produce their level of industrial, because I do like the more metal aspect of industrial as well, but it's definitely a lot more different from agrotech. You know, like I said, there's a pretty big distinct difference between agrotech and industrial, in my opinion. So, but when it comes to industrial metal, it still keeps a lot of the industrial roots. So that's kind of why I'm kind of including it as my number 10 and still kind of lumping it all together here. But yeah, if you are kind of into the whole hardcore industrial metal type of aspect, these guys hit it pretty damn hard with the way that this industrial is produced. Don't really know a whole lot about this artist as well. I'm just a connoisseur of good music, let me tell you. But yeah, my favorite album from these guys is going to be 2012, and favorite song is going to be fucking Uber Death Party. But yeah, those are my top 10 favorite industrial artists, at least currently as of this time. Subject to change, obviously, when we find newer artists, but let me know what you guys think about those. I do have links in the description below if you guys do want to check out those artists, in case you are a connoisseur for good music as well. I'm also open to suggestions as well, so if you guys have any industrial artists, throw them my way. I'm not too heavily into industrial as I used to be, but I do still heavily listen to industrial here and there. And of course, please like, share, and subscribe. It would help me a lot to get into the algorithm. God knows that's what we all have to rely on YouTube. But hopefully you guys have a good rest of your day. I do have things lined up for Labor Day tomorrow, so just been trying to relax. Been a long week. I had to pull a motor out of an F-150, so I'm pretty exhausted. That's why I've kind of lagged a little bit for Saturday. But hopefully you guys have a good rest of your day. I will see you in the next video. Peace out.